Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today and welcome to my review for Shadow of the Tomb Raider. A big thank you to Square Enix for providing a review code well ahead of launch, as it was a welcome surprise. Before we begin, I'd like to explore the lore of Matty when it comes to the action-adventure genre that includes titles like Tomb Raider, Uncharted, and so on. Admittedly, these games have never been my speed. While I respect them for what they are, I notoriously struggle to get into them, but then it hit me that that very opinion gives me a standout perspective compared to others throughout the industry. To wrap up this background piece, be aware that I found Uncharted enjoyable but slightly overrated, and I've played Tomb Raider 2013 to completion, a little of Rise, and that's it. Now, let's rock climb our way into the story. One word sums up the opening to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and that is damn. Talk about setting the tone. Lara Croft kickstarts a drastic, terrifying chain of events by stealing a Mayan dagger, which also serves as a key to a silver box, a final lead left by her now passed father. She does this in order to prevent the group known as Trinity from acquiring it first. What she doesn't realize is the consequence of her hastiness, as the apocalypse soon begins, which in turn leads to one of the game's strongest narrative threads. The story genuinely had me questioning how good of a person Lara Croft was, if her childhood fascination had grown so big that it clouded her vision, and pondering on how she could manage to cope with all the blood that's on her hands. By that, I don't mean Uncharted where Nathan's yelling about mass murder yet going through multiple shooting galleries of his own. It's not always about collecting the latest trinket going ooh and ah over the shiny object from years far gone. The story manages to feel personal to Lara, yet including the suffering of millions around the globe. By its conclusion, I genuinely felt that Lara had really grown up more and evolved into a different, experienced person. The characters are definitely the engine in this tale, as Lara and Jonah, her best friend, lean on each other during their times of struggles, showing the power of friendship. I know it sounds innocent in what I've described as a melancholy story, but it honestly goes to show the reality that a best friend is there to support you at your worst and lift you up onto a pedestal at your best. Yeah, a hug from your BFF won't make the apocalypse stop. You still have to take matters into your own hands. It won't disappear, but it sure helps. However, it's not all rainbows and sunshines, because Dr. Dominguez, leader of Trinity, reprises the villain role well and makes for a more humane antagonist compared to most I have managed to encounter in 2018. In a bizarre way, I found his intentions almost noble, which deviates from the norm on pretty much any enemy. The way he entangled with Lara and the supporting cast aids this format of storytelling, where the wrongdoer always feels close by and doesn't disappear into the shadows until the end of the title. I'm looking at you, Far Cry. Furthermore, a tip of the cap to this game when it comes to the pacing. You have yourself roughly a 13 to 15 hour main story, some side content which I'll delve into later, puzzles, combat, big exciting set pieces, and the game still manages to keep up the pace. This deserves kudos because a game with puzzles like Tomb Raider can quickly lose steam if the player gets stuck, but these puzzles absolutely need to be there as it's a part of the series' identity. The puzzles never felt like a locked gate with a lost key prior to key narrative moments. They were paced in just the right spots, where the game managed to flow smooth the entire way through, which I personally didn't expect going in. There are times I was hoping for a smidge more combat, as it's a bulky, exploring, and puzzle-focused introduction, but it didn't have a negative impact on the experience. On top of all this, the trend continues in gaming, with collectibles really being a must rather than optional to fully understand the ins and outs of a story, bringing into light some key clues of the historical aspect, even if it's not fully based on real-life events. The chase for Mayan artifacts leads Lara and company to Paititi, a hidden city untouched for ages that serves as a hub for activities and the core of the trouble you'll find yourself in. The jungles and hub you're exploring are dashed with a vigorous color palette, making smart use of particle effects and a brighter orange amongst all the green you'll naturally be seeing to make points of interest stand out while remaining true to environmental design. Things aren't as varied in Rise, which I know has the chance to irk people. For me, it works out because my favorite Uncharted hot take was the original one, which was all jungle, so it just sits well for me as a setting. Keep that in mind, that's my taste, my opinion. Yours absolutely may differ, but now that you have a good feel for the story and the world, let's swan dive into the gameplay. There are three major pillars to the Tomb Raider gameplay system: exploring, solving puzzles, and turning anything that is a threat into Swiss cheese. Let's start off with exploration. A lot of this is done through the platforming, and I adored the feeling of controlling Lara. She had a sense of weight that didn't make large leaps feel floaty, but rather intense. Scaling the crumbly structures and seeing them gradually fall apart piece by piece adds to that sensation. Now, there are a lot of these areas on their last legs, but I was happy to learn there wasn't an obnoxious amount of the building suddenly falling apart now because Lara's the one touching them, despite them being complexes erected for hundreds of years up until now. I also loved how some of the environments were designed as they felt entirely natural. A lot of games in this genre normally create convenient, out-of-place traversal pieces like a pipe sticking out or a light post that's tipped over in just the right area. This is once again something that I discovered not to be a common occurrence, thus making immersing yourself into the game world a much easier task. Some walls are marked with a white chalk to tell you that this is something you can scale, but you can disable that if you like. Kudos to both Eidos Montreal and Crystal Dynamics on building scale in unique ways too. There was one point that Lara was crawling around a cavern and she knocked a helmet into a deep, dark pit. It wasn't until seconds later I had heard it land. Using sound to build the size of a space is not only engaging, but a stroke of genius that I hope we see carried into other games when the time is right, such as this. This game also makes spaces feel large 9 out of 10 times because before you enter a large tomb, you're going to be crawling through some claustrophobia-inducing space, and the worst is when it's underwater, okay? I wish I had a counter for the amount of times I subconsciously held my breath alongside Lara as she crawled through these tight areas, and I kept thinking to myself, no way I could do this. How is she doing this? Does she even know what's on the other end? Next is puzzle solving. I'd like to start this off by nodding with complete approval at this difficulty customization that Shadow of the Tomb Raider has. In this section, you will definitely note some things are a bit different from previous Tomb Raider entries, and I feel this is due to the series trying its hardest to become a blockbuster that isn't in the shadow of competition, but a juggernaut of its own. Now back to the settings, you can alter the puzzle, combat, and exploration difficulty. So if you're more proficient in third-person shooters but not the best at puzzles, you can have the puzzle difficulty on easy, yet your combat at hard. I also think a lot of people quit these style of games because they get stuck on a puzzle, so I personally think a lot will appreciate this option. I sure know I did. One of the optional tombs I had entered had mirrors and sun reflections. Instantly I received flashbacks of a puzzle sequence from Resident Evil 5 that I'd rather forget and noped out. Upon switching difficulties for the puzzle, I noted that there was a change in the survival instinct vision, highlighting puzzle pieces to head to next in blue, as well as additional dialogue being added in to string the player along if they are completely stuck. I imagine this won't vibe well with purists, but it's a smart way of making the series accessible without sacrificing its identity. Anyway, yes, there are optional tombs and crypts again, and boy, there are a lot of them. I enjoyed crawling through a good chunk of them, but there were some that did just feel flat out boring and uninspired. This, ladies and gentlemen, is sadly what happens when a series tries to keep up with the growing landscape of open world games and loads of content, but sometimes the formula just isn't a good fit for it, like putting a circle into a square piece. I'll take a handful of intelligent, well-designed puzzles instead of a package trying to stuff as much in as possible, which inevitably leads to some letdowns. Is it the end of the world? No, because the vast majority are mentally intriguing and, more importantly, rewarding. Skills, unique outfits, and more connect to the tomb rewards. Tying in enticing gameplay rewards with the very mechanic that makes your series stand out is a brilliant decision for the gameplay structure, especially when the optional content often rewards you more than the main story, I felt. If I went to 2 tombs, I'd come back with a chunk of skill points to spend and new toys to play with. Now, speaking of skills, there is a skill tree that consists of Seeker, which is exploration and observation focused skills, Warrior, which is combat and weapon focused skills, and Scavenger, which is crafting and stealth focused skills. Between skills giving you access to rare animals to hunt, additional resources when looting for crafting supplies, taking down multiple enemies at once, or the ability to craft special arrow types and so on, I found everything useful and building off of one another. Now this may seem obvious up front that upgrades should be, useful, but often what games struggle with is making sense of there being a third entry in the series in this case, but yet somehow the main character's skills have regressed each time. Since the progression is built into the equipment, resource gathering, and different forms of takedowns, it made sense and felt ultimately more rewarding to me. The resources you collect, like salvage, fur, meat, and so on, can be used to upgrade your weapons and create new outfits. The weapon upgrades are standard, where you're upping your damage, rate of fire, accuracy, reload speed, and so on. Outfits are a bit more enticing to invest in because not only do they look stylish, but each offers their own gameplay buffs to tailor to a playstyle of your choosing, whether you're going stealthy or guns blazing. The last pillar in this trifecta is the combat. Allow me to begin with the stealth, as I am fond of how you can cover Lara in mud, allowing her to blend into her surroundings. It feels like the exclamation point on the grittiness of Lara and how willing she is to do what it takes. Couple that with some incredibly brutal stealth kills where you unapologetically rip the throats out of Trinity, and yeah, it gets pretty gruesome. As I mentioned earlier, it took a while for the combat to really get there, and when you see so many skills built around that very mechanic, I did find myself at first start to wonder early on why it was even there. Eventually, enemies will start rolling your way, and it's your standard third-person shooting affair with soft cover mechanics. Sometimes the soft cover did give me trouble where I'd want Lara to hide behind something and she wouldn't, as well as vice versa. Other troubles I did find in combat when more aggressive enemies would run at me with melee weapons, for example, is that I'd need to evade and then roll out of the way. Sometimes this would lead to me fighting with the camera and losing complete focus of the action in front of me, and this evidently is the weakest aspect of the game. However, it's serviceable enough to get the job done considering the nagging issues I noted hadn't really popped up an insane amount, but they were definitely there. All three of these pillars combine to create a mixed bag of enjoyable gameplay systems as you swap between platforming, solving, leveling up, and shooting. But now, for the most underrated aspect of all games, the sound. Voice work across the board is well done, but I did feel the supporting cast outside of Lara, Jonah, and Dr. Dominguez was notably weaker. The intelligent use of creating space through sound is something I've actually never experienced, where I found it so good I, yes, need to note it one more time. Little sound effects like dust and rock crumbles falling off ledges as Lara grapples with them, or the stickiness of your boots as you drag your feet through the murky muds of the jungle is just downright attention to detail. The vibration of the bowstring release is on point, so much that it made other weapons sound considerably weaker in this odd fashion, such as the shotgun that sounded really like a toy gun in comparison. Overall, there's an average job done on sound, but some really standout creative moments that other companies definitely need to take note of. And lastly, it's time for the verdict. Don't sleep on this game. Tomb Raider does deserve your attention. I know in a year with Spider-Man, the upcoming Red Dead Redemption 2, and so many other titles, it's hard at times to make a convincing case for this type of title. However, the story is really what pushed me over the edge to recommend this game, as I found it action-packed, personal, and thoughtful while being on a global scale. Outside of Zelda, it's really hard to think of any open world / hub-based games that have such a focus on puzzle solving, which also really aids to this title standing out from others you may be playing. Keep in mind the difficulty adjustments that make this a much more engaging experience, allowing players of all skill levels, whether you're very talented or you're just new to games, to take it at whatever pace you'd like. The story actually stands out on its own. As someone who hasn't paid attention to much Tomb Raider lore or could tell you anything about the story in general, I totally understood everything that was going on now, but there were definitely little tidbits there that were for longtime fans. And lastly, the shooting can be a tad floaty, but I know that's clearly not the main focus of the game. So with all that in mind, this is a game I'm going to rate as wait for a small sale, with some dungeon inconsistencies which make up for a lot of content, and some bits in general with the game being rough around the edges. I can't suggest it just now at full price, especially when I know a lot of people have their money set on other titles. However, this isn't a game that you need to outright skip, and I do think that could be said for the rest of the series. Keep your eyes peeled for holiday sales, mark it on your Christmas list. This is a game that should be played. It is a very enjoyable tale that changes things up compared to what we're used to with so many AAA games. Anyway, that'll do it for my review for Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments down below, so do fire away, ladies and gentlemen. If you got any questions, also place those down below. I'll try my best to get back to you. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that, as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.